let's move to Ben Hammersley. That's probably going to tell us that I think that all the universities, except the elite universities, will not matter anymore, at least. So Ben is, as he's sometimes described, a digital pioneer. His official title is the Ambassador of the United Kingdom, appointed by the United Kingdom government for Ambassador for the City of Technology, or is it the city?
Yeah.
For the Tech City. And he's also an editor-at-large of Wired magazine. So, Ben.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm from the internet. How's it going? So I'm going to stand up and then not be able to read my notes from this distance. So yes, as being the person from the internet, the person who's paid by a lot of people to live in the future, as I say, I'm paid to live 6 months in the future and then come back and tell everybody about it. And one of the things you might not know is in January next year, PowerPoint is going to be made illegal. So I don't have slides, I'm afraid. You're just going to have to listen to me. I think it's a good idea, really, to step back a little bit and look at the wider social and technological context that this subject is living within. It's always very important in a time of great change to look as far back and as wide as possible at the beginning. And really, there are three major wider contexts that we need to look at in the next few minutes. The first one, those being technology, the social context, and the economic context of higher education. The technological context is perhaps the most revolutionary. We have, since the 1960s, been living through, or living underneath, what is called Moore's Law. Moore's Law was invented by a man called Gordon Moore. He was the co-founder of Intel, the people who make the microchips. And he noticed in the early 60s, and I think it was 1964, he noticed that the number of components on a microchip doubled for the same price, doubled every 12 to 18 months. Or conversely, the price halved for the same number of components on a microchip. And this was rewritten to say computing power for the same price doubles every year. And he wrote this down, and he thought this was a good idea, and he thought we should recheck this. And in the mid-70s, it was rechecked, and it turned out to still be true, and it is still true, in fact, to this day, that every 12 to 18 months for the same price, you get twice as much computing power. We all know this, right? We all know that, magically every year, a senior executive of Apple will walk on stage and tell everybody that their phones in their pockets are now terrible devices. And every time you buy a laptop, 6 months later, you'll walk past the store, and for the same money, there'll be something twice as good, and you'll be like, fucking hell. And then, we all know this. It's an exponential growth of technological capability that we've been living underneath since the 60s. But it's very important to understand that exponential growth of technology is a new phenomenon. It's really only existed since the 60s. Before digital technologies, we, of course, had technological advance, but it wasn't exponential. It was geometric. And we are living at the moment in a time where our institutions, whether they're educational institutions or governmental institutions or military or any old institution, the very structure and ethos and philosophy and the way and the cultures of these institutions were mostly made in a time before this sudden explosion in technological capability. And this is a situation which is causing problems in every industry, whether you're talking about education or you're talking about the media or newspapers or the travel agency industry or government or international terrorism, whatever it is. Any industry you can think of is being absorbed by the sort of the Godzilla of the internet that comes along and sort of strides through the city and destroys things as it goes. So we have to bear in mind the new capabilities that we're living with. The other thing about Moore's Law is that and this is the same for every industry, not just education, is that it gives you a very interesting quality, which is that anything that you can see today that exists that isn't very good will be amazing in a few years' time. This is a very important thing to realize. Many, many, many industries have failed horribly because they saw a rival, but they dismissed it as being of very poor quality. And Moore's law, this exponential growth of technological capability, destroyed them. A good example of this is Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera. The digital camera they invented wasn't a very good camera. It was 0.1 megapixels. It took a digital photograph that looked like this carpet. Not very good at all. And so, of course, Kodak at the time, who were making transparency film, Kodachrome, the most beautiful film ever made if you're a photographer, they looked at the stuff that they were doing and they said, we are this elite organization that makes this beautiful product. And here is this thing that in theory could be better than us, but at the moment it's terrible, so we'll ignore it. And of course, earlier this year, Kodak went bankrupt. And on the same day that Kodak went bankrupt, Instagram, which is a photography application for your iPhone, which makes photographs look as if they were shot on old Kodak film, was sold for $800 million. So we have this this technology and social context where we're living through a period of massively increased capability, and that capability doubling every year, and it sneaking up on people, sneaking up on industries almost until it's too late. This is also because of the culture of the technological and internet-based communities at large. Because of the culture of developing things in public, of releasing things very early and iterating them as fast as you possibly can, you have a much more accelerated path to improvement of cultural things as well. Wikipedia is a very, very good example of this. OpenStreetMap is another very good example of this, which when they started, they weren't very good, and in theory should never have worked, but in practice, it turns out they're actually quite good. This is the world we're living in today. On the social context, we also have to look in the West. Certainly, I speak from the UK point of view and a North American point of view, which is as it is necessary socially now to have an undergraduate degree. But it's also irrelevant what that undergraduate degree is in. We have a culture at the moment which says to middle-class people in general, you have to have a degree to get a job. But the employers are themselves utterly uninterested in what that degree was in. It's a checkbox mentality. There are many, many, many anecdotes, I'm sure you'll be able to find them, of people who are absolutely perfectly qualified for many positions who didn't get that position because 15 years previously they hadn't got themselves a degree. This specifically happens in the high-tech industries, where I've spent most of my time. The very best programmers on the web and in games at the moment are people who didn't go to university. Because at the time that they should have gone to university, they were busy inventing the web. But now they find themselves up in a very interesting social position of not being able to advance any further because they didn't get a 4-year qualification in English literature 10 years ago. That's the social context. It's weird, but it's true. Of course, if you're an undergraduate or a potential undergraduate, you look at this landscape of it, the necessity to have an undergraduate degree, the social necessity to spend enormous amounts of money on getting that degree, but the also complete irrelevance of that degree once you've got it. And your natural reaction to that is to proclaim it to be bullshit. It doesn't make sense. And of course, it doesn't make sense to most people, at least in the UK and the US, because it's incredibly expensive. In the UK at the moment, if you just go for a standard undergraduate degree, you're probably going to leave university £50,000 in debt, at least. And much higher if you do a proper subject like law. As Ben said earlier, many universities see undergraduates as cash cows. And they know this. It's very obvious to the average 18-year-old that they are basically going to university to have all their money taken from them. And to not only have all their money today, but have all their money for the next couple of decades taken from them. That social context is very, very, very disturbing to somebody who is looking to enter academia, to enter higher education. That economic issue as well, the wider economic horizon is also very important because we're living, certainly in Northern Europe and Western Europe and North America, in a time where every economy is attempting to enter or to win at the more advanced, more competitive industries, specifically the knowledge working industries of technology, of digital services, and so on. There is a huge demand for those people. There is a huge demand for people who are skilled at programming, at statistics, at maths, and those sorts of things. So this, of course, has led to a massive boom in universities, in courses. Because if you have to have a degree to get a job, and the only jobs that are available in Northern Europe and in Western Europe and North America are the sort of things where you sit down in front of a screen and type, which is the majority of jobs, and certainly the majority of jobs that governments are that Western European and North American governments are attempting to create, then it becomes necessary to have a meaningless qualification. And this creates a massive tension in people who aren't interested in going on to master's and doctorate level academia, to the people who just need to get a degree so they can go into the world of work. It creates a massive tension because it seems like blackmail. It seems like blackmail by society, and also blackmail by society which is aided and abetted by the universities themselves, because, as Ben said, the universities see undergraduates as people that they can rob, as fuel for the furnace to fund the research and things and the postdoctorate and all the stuff that we like. Now, of course, as an average undergraduate, looking at this system through the framework of somebody who has lived with the internet since they were 6 or 7 years old, or perhaps since they were even born for some. The average 18-year-old today looks at the setup and sees a couple of very weird paradoxes. The first one is that the internet, every industry the internet has touched, it has disintermediated. It has taken the place of the organization in the middle. So Amazon has taken the place of bookstores. You can now buy airline tickets direct from airlines, which is something that is actually new. You can buy houses direct from the people who are selling the houses. The internet takes away the middleman. And we don't see why that shouldn't continue into every other industry, education being an industry just like any other. The other thing is that it exposes the weirdness of the local restriction. Now, the local restriction is the local restriction on which lecturers you see. Now, of course, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 800 years ago, when universities were first developed, you could only see the lecturer who was physically present where you were, because that was all that was possible. Indeed, up until 5 years ago, you could only see the lecturer who was physically present in front of you. But today, and as Ben mentioned, with these MOOCs and other such courses, with modern communications technologies that are driven by Moore's law, we can, of course, attend the lectures of the greatest lecturers in the world. It doesn't matter if there's 10 people watching it digitally or if there's 10,000 or 100,000. It doesn't matter. And so because we can, because technologically that local restriction has been removed, you now have this weird paradox. The necessity to only attend the classes of lecturers who are physically present in the institution makes as much sense as an institutional library only holding books written by the faculty. And you would never go to an institution whose library only held books written by its faculty, because that would be madness. But from a live lecturing point of view, that's what institutions look like today. If I, through financial hardship or personal reasons, can only go to my local institution, why should that get in the way of me attending one of Miguel's lectures, for example? That's just madness, because technologically it's trivial to do it. And so you're seeing this sudden realization amongst the first customers, the gateway customers to higher education, i.e. 18-year-old undergraduates, that not only is the game completely rigged and a bit weird, but the way that you have to play it, by choosing an institution at all, in fact, is really strange and makes no sense in the 21st century. Undergraduate degrees, if you look at them, consist of basically three things. They consist of the education itself, the stuff that you remember when you've left, which might be not very much. It consists of some form of socialization, has a very good social reason to exist, actually, for society in general. You get all of the young people, you put them all in one big place together so they don't set fire to the rest of the city, and you try and teach them to be adults. So socialization is, and sort of network making and those sorts of things, that's very useful. And then there's accreditation. And the accreditation shows that you've done the previous few years. Now, given the fact that the internet has disintermediated every other industry, it doesn't seem particularly surprising that the internet could disintermediate academia as well. It could look at those three separate things and say, okay, why do they all have to exist under the same banner? Why is it that those three things, the education, the socialization, and the accreditation, why do those three things have to occur in the same place, run by the same people? Why can't they be decoupled from each other? What difference does it make at all for a regular undergraduate degree if all of the lectures that they attend are attended over YouTube, and all the socialization they attend is done in a private place somewhere else, and then they take an exam at the end of the 4 years that's accredited by an accreditation body, and they get a degree? What difference does it make to your regular undergraduate degree? And answering that question is a major challenge for higher education in the next few years. Because for normal people, the answers are actually very poor. The debate is usually centered around elite institutions and elite academic learning. We've heard, and we're going to hear it later on in this seminar, an awful lot about rankings and what it means to go to Harvard or the Ivy League or any of these things. But we forget that actually, unlike everybody in this room, the vast majority of people who go into higher education do not go to elite institutions and are not interested in going on to an elite institution. They just need to get a degree because otherwise they won't get a job. The City College of San Francisco, for example, has more students than all of the Ivy League combined. There are many, many universities like that. And so the question that's being asked at the moment is, if you go back to first principles, what is it that students actually need that is provided by universities that couldn't be provided by somebody else for much less economic cost and much more effectively. The education, socialization, and accreditation bits, how would you do those separately better? Would the majority of undergraduates, for example, be better served by a vaguely structured program of apprenticeships and travel, an independent study, and a big exam at the end? The answer to that, probably, I would say, is absolutely yes. That the vast majority of the people I grew up with, for example, went on to do basically meaningless undergraduate degrees in English or history or something with no desire other than needing to tick a box, and would have turned out to have been better people, better educated, much better for society, much better suited for the workforce, etc., 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 if they had instead apprenticed with somebody, had a structured level of independent study, and some form of accreditation at the end. This is why these MOOC courses, and not just the ones run by elite institutions, but ones run by private companies, are looking increasingly more attractive to undergraduates. Because they learn the things they need to learn, and they get some form of certificate at the end that proves that they did it, but they're not getting themselves tens of thousands of pounds in debt, and they're much better suited to the real world that they're entering. They're also better for the lecturers, for the professors, because that local restriction is also in place for the teachers themselves. Now, of course, there's a big difference between delivering a lecture and teaching, which has to be recognized. But delivering a lecture is a skill in and of itself. And if you might be the greatest lecturer in the world, but if you're not really good at all of the other stuff, you might forever be stuck in a third-tier university somewhere down at the league tables down there and never be recognized. But with the internet, with these MOOCs and so on, you can easily see a time in the very foreseeable future, very close future, that a very talented lecturer who might not be a particularly brilliant academic, which are, of course, different things, might become rock stars in their own right, might actually find their own place in the market. Because those are two different skills. And of course, you might then say, oh yes, but, you know, of course, in the elite institutions, those great lecturers will then, of course, take their students, you know, and they'll gather them in their study, and they'll have toast, and they will sort of mentor them in some special way. Well, maybe, but not really, of course. The grand lecturer gives the lecture, and then the graduate students do all of that bit. So that excuse doesn't really work, and then you find that, for example, in London, with the more practical skills, there's plenty of mentorship and one-to-one tuition available. It's just it's available for a small fee, which means the graduate students get to be able to eat this term, which is kind of a bonus. And the best ones, the best mentors and so on, rise up as well. Of course, accreditation is the key thing here. The fact that you might get a certificate from some website that you can print out onto some fancy paper and put on a frame doesn't make a degree, right? Well, yes. But you have to look at why we're having that sort of accreditation in the first place. For the vast majority of people getting undergraduate degrees, that accreditation is in order to show that you've done that study. It's to wave in front of employers. And so it's not a matter. The accreditation, the value of accreditation isn't really down to academia. The acceptance of new forms of accreditation will come down to employers. Of course, postgraduate and doctoral and higher levels of research and elite institutions will always require that chain of academic sort of that chain of academic excellence all the way up. But for the vast majority of people, they just need something that their employer recognizes as being real. And there's nothing in the world that says that that has to be from a university. Nothing at all. We're already seeing this, again, in the technology world with peer-to-peer universities. There's a particularly good website that's called Stack Overflow. If any of you are programmers or want to get into programming, Stack Overflow is particularly good. It's extremely good, in fact. Hundreds of thousands of people, all of whom are people in the industry right now, and they're asking each other questions. So if I'm programming something, I come up with a problem that I can't solve, I'll go onto Stack Overflow, I'll ask that question, and I will be talked through that problem by my intellectual compatriots around the world. And the ones who give me the best answers get points. It's like a game. And the ones who get the most points get little badges that go next to their profile. And the ones who are the fastest at answering questions or the best at answering questions, who are subject matter experts, they get different badges against their profiles. Now, you sound, well, that sounds like a complete gimmick. That's completely crazy. You know, that's not the same as having a real degree. It's not the same as having a real certificate and a hat and a cape and the whole thing. Now, one of the jobs I do, as Miguel said, was that I'm the Prime Minister's ambassador to Tech City in London. Tech City is the dot-com startup area in London. And there we have many, many, many startups trying to employ many, many people. There's a huge shortage of skilled programmers and designers and engineers. And we did an informal survey of the CEOs and HR people from those companies. And we said to them, okay, you have two absolutely identical candidates, except for one has no academic qualifications whatsoever, but has all of the badges on Stack Overflow. And the other one has a double first from Cambridge in computer science. You know, one really, really shiny degree, some qualifications on a website. Which of these two people would you employ? 100% of the startups in London said the Stack Overflow guy. 100%. It was so insanely biased towards the person who had the public in an open forum, rated by their peers, completely up-to-date information, qualification, was massively more employable than the person with the really amazing, incredibly expensive degree from the very amazing and incredibly expensive university. The accreditation that is good for academia is not the same thing as accreditation that's good for the rest of the world. And so if you're somebody who is only entering higher education to be in the rest of the world, then you kind of don't care about academia's rules. And once you free your mind from that, then you have to start looking at what is the best way of educating yourself. In this way, in fact, these elite rankings are totally pointless. They're utterly irrelevant. Who cares, right? Because most people are never going to go to the top 50 universities. And they're certainly not going to go and learn Mandarin in order to go to the top, 2 universities. They just need to get a bloody degree. So concentrating on rankings, it makes everybody feel big and strong, and it has a certain macho quality to it. And of course, everybody can measure themselves against each other, and we can slap our rankings out on the table, when we're at conferences. But for the most basic customers, nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. In many ways, academics are really the worst people to discuss what degrees are actually for, because they never leave university, right? So this idea of like, oh, we can sit here and go like, let me do another research project on what it's like in the real world. It's kind of weird, right? It doesn't make sense. Now, these MOOCs aren't simply at university level, and this might be the more chilling thing. The most successful massively online open courses are actually at high school level and below. One of the great gifts to the world that the internet has brought us, along with Wikipedia and Twitter and kitten pictures, is Khan Academy. Has everybody seen Khan Academy? Those of you who haven't seen Khan Academy, Khan Academy was set up by a guy called Salman Khan, Indian guy living in America, who had some cousins who lived in a different city who weren't very good at maths. They were like 6 or 7 years old. They were having problems at school doing algebra, and Salman Khan knows about algebra, and so he went onto Skype and he started tutoring them over Skype. And then he started recording those tutoring sessions and putting them onto YouTube. And then he set up his own site, and now the Khan Academy has about 5,000, I think, separate lectures, mostly on mathematics, from primary school all the way up to 18, and many other subjects as well. And when you complete these courses, you get little badges on your profile, and if you do lots and lots of courses, you get lots more badges, just like Stack Overflow. And millions of students use them as supplementary maths education when you're 12, when you're 13, when you're 14. You don't understand algebra at high school because your high school maths teacher is terrible, so you go back home, you bring up your laptop or your iPad or whatever, and you watch a really good lecturer explaining that maths to you. Now, this is a really cool thing. It's all free. You should, and if you want a refresher in geometry, then I would totally recommend it. They're really good. If you want to make a little bit of money tutoring somebody, you can upload your own videos onto it. It's also really good. They're looking for people to translate the videos into other languages. It's really interesting. Salman Khan's on the front cover of Forbes magazine this month, I think it was. He's a big guy. It's a big social phenomenon. Now, the fact that the Khan Academy is a big social phenomenon now for 8-year-olds means that in 10 years' time, those 8-year-olds are going to expect that that is how education happens. They're going to expect that that's how you learn stuff. You learn stuff by looking it up on the internet and watching the videos on YouTube and reading about it in Wikipedia and then leading that on to other stuff. And of course, that sounds horrific from a super high academic point of view. Oh my God, Wikipedia, they must kill themselves immediately. But it's good enough. It's absolutely good enough. And it doesn't cost tens of thousands of pounds a year. So you have this problem that the general received way of getting education is going to change very radically in the next few years. Because you have a whole generation of kids who are growing up with certain expectations of the way they learn things, the way they interact with things, and the way that the world works. And those expectations have come from the way that they use technology. You can see this if you ever put a 4-year-old in front of a television. Because the first thing the 4-year-old will do is go up to the television and do this. And then they will complain that it's broken. Because the screen doesn't work. That's the expectation that management that needs to happen. And for undergraduate level study, for the first bit of universities, they're about to get a whole series of customers who have an entirely different expectation of why they're going, what they're going for, and what they're going to receive when they're there. And because of this market, because of this wider globalization of education, because of the fact that there are so many more institutions, because of the fact there are so many alternatives to it, and because of the fact that employment now requires a different form of education about new and more up-to-date topics, it doesn't make any sense for most people to go to university. It just doesn't make any sense. Because you could take the same amount of money, apprentice yourself somewhere, spend a year abroad getting drunk on a beach, or whatever, traveling the world, and have a couple of years of independent study and you'll be less in debt, better educated, and more likely to be employed. And so for the vast majority of people, not the people going to Harvard, not the people going to LSE, not the people going to Oxford, but for the vast majority of people, that is better than a standard university and a system that was invented before the printing press. We have seen over the past few years many industries fall away because technology caught up with them, and because the way that we interact with that industry changes radically. The music industry had it about 15 years ago. The television industry is going through it right now. The newspaper industry is going through it right now. And all of those industries weren't paying attention because they were very inward-looking. They were continually looking at themselves and saying, we're television, nobody can affect us. We're newspapers, we're an institution, we're part of society, nobody can affect us. And suddenly they find that they're actually about to go out of business. So what higher education needs to do, I think, and for national policymakers and for society at large, is to go back and look at the first principles of what higher education is, and what universities are for. Look at those first principles. What is it that we're trying to do with people? Educate them, yes. Socialize them, yes. Accredit them, yes. Move the best ones on to higher and higher study. Produce researchers, produce more research, create more papers, all of those things. But they're all separate now. They are being separated out by the internet and the effects of the internet on society. And for universities to continue to exist at all, for them to stay the same, they have to change. For universities to continue to exist at all, they have to look at their place in society and grab hold of the bits that only they can deliver and prove why they're worthwhile, not to the elite researchers and the best and the finest minds of their generation like everybody around this table today, but prove why universities have to exist for the person who just needs a degree so they can go and get a job, because without a degree, apparently, you're not employable anymore. That's the problem that you face, not what's going to happen in the top 10 of the elite academies, not what's going to happen against some form of competition with the Chinese, but actually competition against people not understanding why you exist in the first place and finding something better, probably on YouTube, next to the kitten pictures. Thank you very much. I'll take questions.
So before everybody that is a young academic in here and not so young academic starts running out and looking for a new job, we still have some time for some questions. Or maybe run out and do some videos, actually. Carlos, and then Rick.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. But I have a question. I think your case is very compelling to explain why universities have to change. But I didn't see the second point of your discourse, which was why internet seems to be the alternative. If I got this point wrong, please correct me. It seems to me that you haven't addressed one important thing that universities and in general teaching does, which is training in skills. So take the case of someone who wants to be a lawyer and wants to be a litigator. There is an element of training skills there that could be very difficult to provide by internet. It's like saying someone, okay, you can be a litigator just by watching Ali McBeal or one of these series about lawyers. It's a little bit absurd. This kind of training comes through interaction. I always will suppose that if you are in a good school, law school, you'll get a good training in this direction. So is the internet going to be a substitute for that at all?
No, I don't think so. I think you're right. And I think obviously there are some professions, law, medicine, law and medicine, that require that sort of professional training. But actually, that could also be done as an apprenticeship. You don't actually have to go to university to learn that interaction. That could be done easily as a pupillage. It could be done easily, you know. And in fact, in many ways, that is how it's done anyway, right? It's just that it's shifted down a bit. And so there's a lot to be, so now, to get onto the other thing, I wouldn't say, and I would never ever claim that you can get a complete education solely from watching stuff on the web. It absolutely requires a level of mentorship, a level of discussion, a level of person-to-person time. But again, it's not clear that that has to happen within the auspices of a university. There's again, you know, the technology is the thing I know the best, so I'll keep going back to technological examples. But there's a beautiful business, very lovely place in London, in Shoreditch, which is a room about this big, and it's really, really gorgeous. It's got gorgeous sort of Danish furniture and so on. And they provide tuition in programming skills. The vast majority of their syllabus is online and self-directed study. But when you go through one of their courses, you have effectively tuition hours where you go to that private place and you interact with somebody who is paid to be that person. It's exactly the same as having some form of tuition as an Oxford college or something like that. Now, the fact that that's not a university and the fact is irrelevant. And in fact, although you're still paying for it, in total, the cost for that education is way less, much, much less than the equivalent cost that you would pay to for an undergraduate degree in the university half a mile down the road. And stepping away from the very academic professions like law or medicine or you know, equivalents, just for people who just need certain bits of knowledge and a certain bit of accreditation to go into the rest of the world, that's good enough. And the concept of good enough is the thing that has always broken industries over the past 10 or 15 years, which is Wikipedia is free and good enough that we no longer have the Encyclopedia Britannica. You know, the MP3 isn't the most amazing sounding thing in the world, but it's good enough to put CDs and vinyl out of business. And this sort of education for the majority of professions, not law, admittedly, not medicine, not any of the others, but for most stuff, it's good enough.
Not law, not medicine, what about archaeology? I mean, how did you come up with this?
Chemistry, biology, physics.
I mean, where do you come with this conviction that it's good enough for this discipline or the other discipline because in a discipline don't need to? Qualify what do you mean by that? Because I found that
because the vast majority, because because the vast majority of people who do undergraduate degrees don't use that degree as soon as they leave the university. This is the issue that you have within higher education at the moment. Of course, archaeology and for chemistry and chemical engineering and mechanical, you know, there's plenty of things which you are entering a profession and you need that solid basis of that education. Now, with engineering and things like that, I again would say that an apprenticeship model is perhaps better, and maybe with archaeology as well. But you know, whatever, you know, but there are sort of, it seems to me there are three classes of subject of degrees that people take at undergraduate level. They take something that they have to learn to be that thing. So they want to be a lawyer, so they take a degree in law. They want to be a doctor, they take a degree in medicine. They want to be an archaeologist, they take a degree in archaeology. And that's fine, and that's good. That's really good. And then, of course, that is perhaps best served by a dedicated institution which is dedicated to that subject. But the vast majority of people are taking degrees which they never use ever again. And for society, and for them as individual customers of education, of them sitting at 18 and going, I'm about to get myself £50,000 in debt, what am I spending this money on? It ceases to make, if there is an alternative to going to a university and getting a degree in something that isn't useful for them, apart from having the certificate, once there's that alternative, it ceases, the competition is there. And that's the problem that universities have to face, that there is suddenly a competition between something that might be useful or that is recognized and something that is pointless but is recognized.
Okay, just.
Sorry, you use aggregate concept. The vast majority of people are individuals. They might all want to try.
They might.
Clearly, the vast majority will not become a top lawyer, but there might be many more that want to try, and they don't want to decide at the beginning that they are the vast majority who wouldn't care at all, and this is good enough. This is a kind of statistical artifact, which might be true in general, but doesn't apply to the individual.
Can I?
Individuals want to try.
Okay, but just before you answer, because Carlos has a follow-up on that, and I also want to, let's collect that, and then we give it. No, I know there are more people too, but just those that are follow-up specifically on this point.
Okay, go on.
Then we'll move to it. No, but just before. Go ahead, because I wanted to say something on what.
I just wanted to restate the point that you perhaps have a case to differentiate universities and making some activities of universities private or performed by functional agencies. By the way, this proposal to go back to the apprentice system is what we had in the Middle Ages in Europe. The system of training within a corporation and then you get qualified. So it's a kind of going back to the past from the future. But my point was, internet does not provide a response to this kind of challenge that you may be rightly pointing at. So what is actually the kind of role that you see at internet there? Internet offers an enlarged market, some kind of additional instruments, and so on and so forth. But still, I don't see how internet, as you put in the title of your presentation, perhaps it was not the emphasis in your talk, could be an alternative to the system we have now, a whole alternative to that. So
It's okay. Sure.
It's on the same point. Thank you. Your talk reminded me of Peter Drucker, who said in the mid-90s that click universities would replace brick universities, and never since have so many brick universities been built because the technology was apparently not able to absorb the extension, the big growth of numbers of students. So the question now is what MOOCs are going to do. Of course, you refer to the particular area of IT engineering and technology, and there we had indeed in 2000 already this big report on a parallel universe, exactly what you tell me. But you rightly say that there's a couple of other professions where actually the profession itself has a great interest in keeping the license to practice very limited because of wages and other reasons. So my question is, first of all, why don't universities that produce MOOCs give any credit or even a certificate to the people who accomplish them? Because they don't even give a certificate. My students take them, but they have to turn to us to make it count towards a degree. And they take statistics at Stanford, they take AI at Princeton and Stanford. It's wonderful, but they don't even get a certificate. There, I want your answer on that. And the second question is, and I come back to my point on the financial crisis, will cost indeed make the difference? Because I don't believe that technology is going to make the difference. Will cost do it, in particular with a view to student debt?
Yes. So.
Before, I just want to add one final thing on this.
Okay.
That is, I think the debate, for example, with Stefan was a lot on the disciplines, whether certain subjects are appropriate or not for those online forms. But I think we also, in the comparison, including you, Stefan, you are assuming a university form of teaching that is not the generalized form of teaching in many places. When in Rome La Sapienza, in law, you have 10,000 students enrolled in the first year, 10,000. The overwhelming majority of which never goes to classes and just read textbooks. What is the interaction there? What is the analytical skills that are taught by professors? Isn't that actually better than to actually see online lectures? And that's the kind of substitution process that I think may happen even regarding subject matter. It may not happen regarding the elite teaching of some people, but then the other ones.
There was the immediate follow-up because my name is Katarzyna Gracz. I'm a Polish law researcher here at the EUI, and exactly the same thing that was coming to my mind was what Miguel was just saying. In Poland, we don't really have elitist universities, especially teaching law, but what we have is a massive universities teaching law because we have lots of American and international law firms emerging right now in Warsaw and in many big cities. So what you're talking about actually is already in place. I mean, the fact that people don't care about universities at all, even if they're law students, even without the new force of the internet, because what is very the everyday phenomenon in Poland right now is you enroll for the law studies, you don't even show up at the university, but at the same time you enroll for the big corporation where you're getting the apprenticeship and where you're actually learning the skills. Because what you get at the university, which is actually publicly funded, so it's not even about money anymore, it's getting lectureship that's, you're not really, lectures, thousands of students, and you're not really getting any tutorials, anything. And then you need practical skills. No matter if you want to continue at the academia and get research as practical skills, or you prefer to go to the business, you just don't get it at the university. So universities are becoming treated more and more as something that is useless for everyone. So what is the phenomenon, just last sentence, in Poland, people are actually preferring to go to the private university, pay for studies, and then at the same time work for the company where they get practical skills.
I think that's a very good example. And now transpose that to countries like the UK, where suddenly you have to pay for the privilege. So the idea for many people of going to a lecture with 1,000 other people and knowing that you're paying £10,000 a year for that, which you can eat, and of course every student in the first week either does the maths themselves or is told by their first tutor, by the way, you have to come to, you have to come to the tutorial because it's costing you £50, There's always that, everybody does that maths. And so to go to your last question about the economic crisis, absolutely. It just, for most people, if society says you have to have a degree, but it doesn't matter what that degree is in, it's just seen as an accreditation thing, and which is the way the world is outside of academia, right? And this is the important thing. Outside of academia, you have to have a degree, but what that degree is in is irrelevant. Then that's a form of rent taking. That's a form of sort of accreditation for the sake of it, which many people are looking at and saying, really? Society says I have to enter my 20s massively in debt? And so that is, I think the economic crisis is raising all of those questions as a social movement. I forget your first question.
Yeah, why don't the universities that
yes.
refuse to give credit?
Yes. Why? I think because, well, A, that's changing, that a lot of them are looking at certifying things, and I know that, Ben was saying last night that was it one of the Coursera, is it?
Yeah.
That,
working with the American Council on Education to talk about getting recommendations.
So that's evolving. That sort of accreditation is evolving. Now the reason that the elite institutions don't do that is because the MOOCs for them, I think, are fabulous marketing. They're fabulous marketing specifically for very, very, very high-paying foreign students to come to see the quality of the teaching. It's just a very big business card for those elite organizations. And it's a very big business card also for the individual academics, because because speaking as somebody who spends most of his time trying to sell his book, if you've become the tutor in artificial intelligence with 100,000 regular students, then you can sell 20,000 copies of your textbook every year on Amazon, and that's a nice living. And so it works very well on an individual basis as well.
Two answers that I got. Sorry.
Well, that's exactly my... Sorry, Marek, but I'm sure it's the same question. Because this is exactly, by the way, thank you for a fascinating talk. Well done. really, Ben. But that's exactly the question that I have, and where I sort of lose the argument, Ben. MOOCs have a reputation too, I would argue. I mean, the example, artificial intelligence example of Stanford, 160, Ben used it as well, 160,000 students, 90 countries or more. Everybody knows about that MOOC.
Yeah.
And that MOOC has a higher reputation than the MOOC that some kid would invent for, you know, whatever course and then put on the internet.
Sure.
So my argument would be, in the end, if I want to become rich in your new world, I will start a little business on the internet doing rankings of MOOCs.
Yeah,
See what I
reviewing.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, I think your argument failed, if I may say so, regarding this part that, you know, there is no reputation related to this. There is reputation as well, and employers will say, well, this MOOC from Harvard or Stanford is more attractive than from the kid on the block.
I agree with you up until the bit where you assume the inevitability of the existing reputations transferring to the new medium. And this is something that we've seen in many other bits of the internet. So if look at journalism online. The big newspapers across the world, when the web appeared, they all said, you know, why would anybody go to a blog for news? We're the New York Times, and therefore people come to us. And, you know, why would anybody go to a blog? And so 4 years ago, at the last US presidential election, there was a blog by a guy called Nate Silver, and Nate Silver wrote this blog, which is all about you know, all about politics, and it was the most read website in the country for the week up to the you know, presidential election, and it ended up with the New York Times having to buy Nate Silver, and the one single blogger is responsible for 20% of all of the New York Times traffic at the moment. And it's the same thing for people. I remember in the UK, people would say, like, why would anybody go to something called Yahoo to find out what's happening online? Or why would anybody go to Google? You know, we're the Times of London. I was working for the Times at that time. You know, we're the Times of London. We're the people. We have the reputation about this is us. This is what we do. You know, we're all about truth. And we were just ignored, completely ignored. And the same thing for video content, the same thing for music, the same thing for all forms of culture. And so the idea that, now of course, for the top 5 in the rankings, you know, for Harvard and LSE and Oxford and, you know, Caltech and MIT and so on, those sorts of big brands, of course, they're always going to be kind of, you know, they're always going to be household names that are recognizable to people, to 18-year-olds and their parents in, you know, in choose your suburban town anywhere in the world. Of course, those are going to be recognizable. The interesting question is what happens to the institution that's ranked 495th? What happens to the institutions that are ranked 4,000th, who nobody has ever heard of, that has no reputation whatsoever? And that ability, the ability to create new reputations online, because of social media, because of the way that the internet works, is so powerful and so quick that you can have something like the Khan Academy, which is only, I don't know, 2 years old, go from being nothing to being, you know, millions and millions of people. You can have Facebook, which is 8 years old, going from 1 user to 1 billion users in 8 years. And when all of these industries, this happens in every industry, that they say, but we're the people with the reputation. We're the people who know all about this. We're the, you know, we're the finest travel agency in the world, in the country. You know, people will wait for us to go online. People will wait for us to, and they won't touch the internet until we're there. And it turns out that's not what happens. It turns out that nobody cares about offline reputations online, which is why there are no bookshops anymore and Amazon is enormous. It's, the reputation just doesn't transfer.
And Andre, Ben, and then I'll give to you. I'll collect the 3 questions and then you will answer.
I have to remember
Andre.
the questions. It's a nightmare.
Thanks, Miguel. I will be brief because I think most have been has been said, but I wanted to address. I found your presentation really very interesting, and I think it should lead us academics to think how to integrate this new content which is available in the way we teach. That's quite obvious. There where I'm more skeptical is if specifically for undergraduate students, if they will have the independence and autonomy to and the necessary discipline to structure a full-fledged education at undergraduate level, not only taking this particular class or that particular class that they can take online, but to have the full-fledged program, bring that together. I think that's an enormous challenge that will possibly be very difficult for most of the students, and then they will end up have very little at the end.
Yeah, but I think that's the same problem if you've got a building or not.
Just add one word to it. I think, I firmly believe that even if students do not in some mass universities go to classes, there is still something to the fact to belong to a community of students at a certain moment of time, specifically if you're flying out, if you're not in your hometown, not living with your parents.
Sure.
And that's something which is not possible if you're working just isolated by yourself. And then the very last indication, I think on society, if the schemes that you are sketching would realize, it would have enormous effects, because the experience of the student period, the life that you have as a student in a certain university or a series of universities, makes you learn a lot in the exchanges with other students and to gain a life experience. If you do that by yourself on the internet, I think in terms of societal impact, that would be quite dramatic.
Well, actually, that's in some ways I have a similar question or comment. You know, first of all, I mean, I agree. It's a wonderful talk, and I agree with so much of what you've said. But you know, I've interviewed and met a lot of these guys from Silicon Valley who were involved. You know, they're hackers, and there's a certain ethos. And I have to say, from my point of view, there's a certain arrogance that a lot of these guys, it's mostly guys, have. And I think there's a sense, I don't know if you've heard this, Ben, but you know, you'll talk about some big education policy question, you know, student debt or something, and they'll just say, if I could just get into a weekend with a bunch of guys, we'd just hack a solution. You know, they really think they can just do anything. And I think similarly with university education, I think that, and I'm conflicted because everything you say is real. At the same time, you know, I was walking and I was doing a tour this morning and I see a photo of Machiavelli, and so I was lucky. So I got to read The Prince, and you know, I see I see Dante, you know, and I know something about, I mean, know a little bit about Dante, and that's because I had a broad undergraduate education where I read lots of things. Now I realize I'm part of a small segment, but I think that we shouldn't assume that people at many levels can't have access to that. So really the question in sort of web terms is, who is the curator? Who decides what you need to know? If I'm an 18-year-old and I think just writing code is the best thing in the world, yes, that's all I need for certain jobs, and I might be very good and I might help create the internet. But actually, I think most 18-year-olds are stupid. I think most 18, I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way, but I think they're ignorant. I'm sorry, not stupid. They don't know very much. They think they know much more than they know. So to me, even though this is not the hacker ethos, you need wise older people telling ignorant younger people, here are some of the things you need to know. Now, I think you can do that online. I think you can integrate those too, but I worry that so much of the rhetoric comes down to just do it yourself. Those idiots in the universities, they don't know anything. And I think, yeah, there are lots of problems with universities, but there is this notion of some coherent idea of what you need to know to be an educated person.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very thought-provoking speech. Just a quick question. What do you think will happen to study abroad programs? Because that part of education, among the three subjects that you have talked about, but that part of education that requires even more to go abroad and possibly have an internship abroad, what do you think will happen? I'm just curious to hear your point of view. Thanks.
May I tell you a little story? Your argument, you have two kinds of arguments, if I may say so. One of them is, since we look at things that don't work well, and we believe they will never work well, which is a good argument. But at the same time, we have things that we think will work well and will never really work well. And I'm going to give you probably a wrong example in the future, but we are all speculating. When I was a high school kid, so that means a long time ago, they invented some way of teaching languages, which was, we'll put some headphones on, we'll talk to each student would be on a booth, and we'll learn that. After 2 or 3 classes, we all abandoned it because it was so boring that the teacher said, well, let's go back to the classroom. And the other day I was passing through a street, and I saw a school language advertising the following: here we don't have computers. That was the advertising. Here we don't have computers, which I thought it was really a good thing to advertise, because they were saying, here we don't put you on some booth and something, we just have conversation and so on. So this is the thing. I bet, though, that you are right or you are wrong. I bet anyway, because I don't know exactly what you were saying. I don't know what will happen. Your argument is very compelling, and all your examples are really great, but who knows? Now, let me go back to the second thing. Part of the argument, and that's where I'm a little bit hesitating, is this. Part of the argument, and your argument, I'm sorry to say, was exactly the same, is this: university sucks. University sucks. And so, why don't have the same thing just with computers? It's cheaper, which is a kind of a sad argument. I'm not saying that you are right or wrong, but do you agree with me or not? Thank you.
Okay, so I think yes, universities suck, but the answer isn't just replace everything with computers. It's replace it with the mix of stuff. Whether it's a mixture of replacing the lectures that you're not going to go to anyway with the best possible lectures that you're going to watch in your own time, and a combination of that and mentorship and apprenticeship and so on. So yes, you're right. The idea of swapping it out completely and just giving somebody, that's the same as just giving somebody a textbook and coming back in 4 years' time. It's just not the same thing. So I agree with you. And in terms of pedagogic research that shows which is the best form of tuition and so on, I don't know either, but for the first time ever we've got a bit of competition, so that should make that field of study a bit more interesting. In terms of study abroad, I think the value of study abroad is ever more increasing every year because of all of the other stuff, because of the additional education that you get from studying abroad. I have studied abroad in many countries, and you learn a lot more than the stuff you learn in the classroom, and that's the benefit. And in fact, I think that study abroad courses will just actually get longer. We were discussing this, in fact, last night, the fact that 6 weeks somewhere is vaguely pointless. A year somewhere is really good.
So that's not the trend. The trend is now increasing enormously towards shorter programs.
Sure, but I can see it changing to go into a different direction, and certainly it's worth the investment. If students start looking at their education as an investment, because if you're going to borrow that much money, you better make sure you're spending it properly, and an investment in a year abroad I think is very useful. In terms of the idea of community and society and so on, which came from Andrea, I think there's an awful lot of nostalgia that comes from people who've been through a very heavy academic, upbringing. There's sort of nostalgia that your time as a student is the greatest time in your life, and you couldn't possibly have met anybody or gotten laid or whatever if you hadn't been at college. The idea that sort of socialization can only happen within an undergraduate experience, I don't think is actually true, because plenty of people are perfectly fine without going to university and so on. And also, I agree with you about the discipline aspect, about the fact that, of course, people have to actually do the work. But I'm not sure that having a building makes people more likely to do the work. There are plenty of people who, quotes, go to university, who never go to the university. And so discipline is a skill in and of itself that I think is, is irrelevant to the location. So, and again, I just I don't see that as being a problem, but I can see why people think it's an issue, because that's how a lot of people in academia, that's how you developed, right? You went to university, you had an amazing time, you made lifelong friends and had an amazing intellectual repartee for the, and so on and so on. But that, just because you as an individual had that experience doesn't mean that experience is necessarily institutional in its nature. In terms of the curation aspect of it, that's also very true, that it does require, the grey-haired, worldly wise, super scholar to say, you as a first year or second year or third year undergraduate, this is what you need to be a well-read person. But in many ways, those curricula only need to be written once. And they only need to be written once by one person. And so, the curricula on Renaissance studies at undergraduate level probably hasn't changed in, 100 years? What? So, go to the Uffizi, read Dante, read Machiavelli, study the Medici.
That's what you think is Renaissance study?
At undergraduate level, the basic education you require to be a genuinely educated, rounded, general person is even mathematics, is very, very slim. Now, I would love for everybody to have an undergraduate level degree in every possible subject. I'd love for everybody to be like multiply qualified with deep and wide understanding. But the sort of education that is necessary to be a genuinely educated person is by definition very wide and very shallow. And that shallowness doesn't change very much. You should be able to recognize the Da Vinci against the Picasso, but to understand the finer points of the Sforza dynasty is not necessary to be an educated 20-year-old. It's just not. And the same thing for maths, the same thing for, everybody should understand how a car engine works, but it doesn't, but they don't need to be mechanical engineers to a huge degree. And so, although it's upsetting for everybody to go, well, actually, you don't need to learn huge amounts of this stuff, but you don't. Unless your ambition is to be in this room or this institution. In that case, fantastic. But for the vast majority of people, they just need a rounded education. And you can get a better rounded education by watching box sets of BBC Arts documentaries than you can by going to most universities at undergraduate level. And one will cost you 50 quid, and the other one will cost you 50,000. It depends on the country, absolutely. But with the economic crisis that we're talking about, I can see that every country in Europe at some point is going to start charging people quite a lot of money.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that the discussion will continue over some coffees and drinks.